on, everyone? Thanks for joining another episode of Air Guns of Michigan. My name is Moose, and today we're going to be talking the FX Maverick again. But today we're not going to talk so much about whether I like the gun or not. You guys already know I like the gun. But what we are going to address is how to adjust these dual regulators. Now, there are people that have put them out. Matt did a great one just recently. If you haven't seen Matt's YouTube video on how to adjust these, check him out. You can find him at AirArmsHuntingSA on YouTube. And he did a great video. However, I've had people that have contacted me because they know that I have this, and they've been, kind of asking me a lot of questions like, well, I guess I didn't understand, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. So actually today, I actually video chatted with a guy and actually walked him through how to adjust the two different regulators. Now, I'm not saying that my way is better or anything, because my way is going to be very similar, if not identical, to the same way these other people are doing this. However, I just think that there's a few things that need to be covered as well, and they weren't really talked about. Couple of things just to get it out of the way. Number one, read your manual and know your gun. That's first and foremost. Second, if you're not mechanically inclined at all, or you're just like a little anxious about this, don't mess with it. Continue shooting it the way that it is. This is more of a semi-advanced thing to do to your gun, especially if you just don't have any past history in doing it. Maybe you want to watch the videos a few times, kind of draw your own conclusions, because I'm only going to share what my general ideas are when it comes to the different calibers as well. But I also want to make something very clear. I will not be held liable for anything that you do to your gun, whether it voids your warranty or not. This is strictly just me showing you what I do with my personal gun. This is my personal gun, and anything that you do to your gun, that's on you. That has nothing to do with me, Air Guns of Michigan, Matt, any of the other people that have done anything and talked about this in any way. Even Ernest put out a video on the FX page on YouTube. You can always check out Ernest's video as well. But once again, I am not liable for anything that you may have happened to your gun because you listen to me. I'm only sharing my opinions. So, first things first, when we are talking about adjusting the regulators in these guns, there is a regulator here that fills basically a small portion of plenum, right? This is your first regulator or your high regulator. I may refer to it in both different terminologies throughout this video. I may say your high reg or your first reg. I am referring to the regulators that you adjust on the bottom of your Picatinny rail down here where you would mount your bipod. There is a little hole right there. This is how we're going to adjust our high regulator. The second regulator, and yours may look a little bit different. I've noticed that mine is kind of on its side. A lot of the other ones that I see, sometimes they're over here up on top, or they're over here up on top. Mine just happens to be there. But this is my second regulator, or my low pressure regulator. Couple of things that you're going to need. You're obviously going to need your Maverick. You're going to need a 2.5 millimeter Allen key. And highly recommended that you have an air tank handy, because we're going to go through some air while we're setting these regs. Another thing to be noted that I found is that my gun happens to be the sniper version. So I have a 580cc bottle here on the front of my gun. It holds enough air that if I only do this once from a full charged bottle, I can get away with it without having to refill my gun. However, I did talk to a gentleman today that had a compact version with the short little stubby bottle, and every time that we unscrewed the bottle or made a change and tried to fill this plenum, the pressure in the bottle dropped significantly enough that we had to keep refilling his gun. So, first things first, I am at about 175 bar. I am going to top my gun off, and if we look here, we can see that the max air pressure in the Maverick is 250 bar. Now, I will say this, I do know that for my gun it says 250 bar. I do not have a compact, and I do not have a steel cylinder bottle or a steel bottle version either. So make sure that you know what your fill pressure is, okay? I don't know if yours is still 250 bar like mine is. Probably is, but just to get it out of the way. So, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and top my gun back off to 250 bar. And we're going to do this slowly. If this is your first time adjusting or filling a PCP gun, speed is not your friend when you're filling your tank. You want to go as slow as you can. I mean, you know, without it being super creepy. But you don't want to expand all this stuff as fast as you possibly can. So I have a tendency to kind of just, you know, my needle's creeping, you know, slowly. That's kind of where I'm comfortable. You may have a different opinion, and that's okay too. So let's see, I'm just about at 250 bar. And there we go. Alright, so I'm going to bleed out my air. Also, you're going to want to take note that if you do have one of these long cables like I do, or fill hoses, you are going to use significantly more air as you bleed your line, and that's going to affect how many charges you can get out of your tank. So you may want to start this whole process with a fully charged tank. Alright, so there we have it, 250 bar. Alright, so a couple things to get out of the way on top of what we've already mentioned is, this is not a regulator pressure. It is not. It will not tell you your regulator pressure at all. This gauge here, towards the front of the gun, up by the bottle, only tells you the pressure that's inside of your bottle here. Nothing else. Nothing else. I've ran into people asking me this. Well, how come my gun says this? How come my gun says this? That's your bottle pressure. So we are never going to return to looking at this unless we notice that, you know, hey, we're not getting a good fill. Now that we have filled our gun and we haven't touched anything, we want to make a few recordings, okay? And this is one thing that I like to put inside my manual. I just grab the back page, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look down at my rear regulator pressure here. Now, I've tuned my gun a few different times, and I've played around with some things, and I know where my gun is best equipped at, and it's right about where I am right now. Now, this is a 22 caliber. Your results may be a little bit different than mine. These gauges are not exactly pinpoint accurate, but I definitely want to record roughly where my gauge is now. And my gauge is roughly at 90 bar. So, that 90 bar is reading my low or second regulator. So this reading right now, the way the gun sits without touching anything, is reading not this first regulator, but the second regulator. So this is reading 90 bar off my second regulator. Now, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to figure out what the pressure is in our first regulator, or our high regulator. And it's a very simple thing to do without doing much to the gun. If we simply just grab our 2.5 millimeter Allen, stick it into the second regulator. This is the first regulator, second regulator. And we're going to turn this counterclockwise until the inner part, if you guys can see that, is flush with the outer part. This is kind of like a brass. So we're just going to slowly turn this until it is flush, and you're going to hear airflow as well. It's another thing I want to be clear on. I was helping somebody, and they said, man, it sounds like my gun's leaking. No, that's air rushing from your high side to your low side. So, I mean, your gun may leak, but if it's leaking, then you need to replace the O-ring. So once again, we're going to back this out until that is flush. I know you guys aren't going to be able to really see that, but that is flush straight across the back there. Now, if I look down at this regulator now, it's no longer reading 90 bar. And the reason that it's not reading 90 bar is because now I've completely bypassed this second regulator. So all the pressure that is allowed into the gun through this first regulator has now pressurized from the bottle to the end of my plenum off of what this regulator is set at. So if I read this number now, I get about 110 bar. So I can write down 110 bar. Now, the reason I'm writing these down is because I may find that maybe it's just not shooting as well as it was before. Or maybe it's just not, I don't know, maybe it's not shooting really much faster, and I understand that too. But I definitely want to keep a record of where my gun was prior to making any kind of changes. Now, with that in mind, I do want to make a change to my gun, and I'm going to make it right here today. I want to set my high reg, or my first regulator, at 130 bar. I want to set my second regulator at 100 bar, because I want to see if I can get a little bit more speed out of the slugs that I'm shooting. And so far, I can tell you that I am in love with these Howler slugs. I mean, anything Nick Nielsen, to be honest with you, is fine. I have shot the FX hybrids. I mean, they're good too. I just happen to really dig these slugs. These Daystate Howlers, you know, between Daystate and Nielsen Specialty Ammo, I mean, I'm being for real, man. These things are freaking cooking, and they are accurate. I mean, it is crazy. So, I'm just saying. But I do want to see if I can get a little bit of speed and keep the accuracy that I already have. So that's why I decided to do this anyway. All right, so now we've completely bypassed our second regulator. We know that our first reg, or our high reg, is set at 110 bar. So the next thing to do is to drain the gun of the air that's in it, okay? So we're going to go ahead and crack our bottle loose, and you're going to hear a rush of air. It's okay. These bottles are made to be removed. You can hear it just real quick. Now I can continue to take the barrel off, or not the barrel, sorry, the bottle off. Now, the gun is still charged, okay? There is still a lot of air pressure in this gun, okay? Before I started this video, I did make sure that my gun was empty, and I actually shot a round out of it just to make sure, and then I dry fired it just to double check, and it is empty. So I'm going to go ahead and put the gun on fire. I'm going to cock the gun, fire, cock the gun, fire, and I'm going to continue to do this until air starts to leak out. There we go. And now you guys can hear the air leaking out of my gun. So I'm going to set the gun down. I'm going to let it do its thing. I'm going to get all of the air pressure completely out of this gun so that I, can make a proper adjustment to my regulators, as you never want to try to turn your regulator in while the gun is charged. I've heard people say that, yeah, you can. I don't know. I just kind of look at it like, I'd rather be safe than sorry, and I've got a compressor. It's not a big deal. Got an air tank. I can put more air back in my gun. I'm just going to reclaim it anyway when I go to fill it up later. Right? So we're going to go ahead and keep letting it go down. It's still coming out, but even this front bottle rag pressure now reads 0, which it should. And this back one is just about empty. All right. Got a little bit of air coming out. That's fine. We can continue to talk now. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is set your first regulator. The only way to do that is to keep this second regulator flush so that it's being bypassed. Now you might ask, well, why would I do that? Well, because the only way to tell what this reg pressure is off this gauge back here. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take our 2.5 millimeter, we're going to stick it in the hole in the bottom here, and we're just going to slowly, excuse me, spin this until we get a little bit of resistance. Doesn't matter if it's not all the way closed. It's not going to be open enough that it's going to make a difference. But you definitely do not want to crank those things in, as you will absolutely damage your regulator, your seals. Just trust me, just till it's snug. You'll feel the resistance. It's obvious. All right, so here we are. We're still on zeros all the way around. We're going to take our bottle that we just filled right before we started, and we're going to screw it back onto the gun. All right. Now you will notice you shouldn't really hear any air movement, and my gauge is still on 0. The reason is because we shut this first regulator all the way down. We screwed it in enough that it's not allowing any air to travel into this plenum, past the second regulator, and then, you know, have an impact on this gauge. So we did talk that I wanted to set mine at 130 and 100. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Allen. I'm going to stick it into my first regulator here. All right. I'll try to do this so you guys can watch everything I'm doing. And then I'm slowly going to start turning counterclockwise to open the valve. And you can see, well, maybe you can't see, but my needle is increasing. And I'm going extremely slow. And some people might say, well, why not just give it a crank and see what happens? Well, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to go past my target first or high regulated pressure. I want to land as close as I can to 130 without going past it, so that I don't have to go back, drain the gun again, and start all over. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep slowly going, right about 60, 70, 80, 90. I mean, you'll get a feel for it as you're kind of turning your Allen. You'll see that, like, you know, a half turn kind of takes you up to X. All right, so I'm at about 125. All right, I'm at 130. Now, the next thing that I personally do with my guns is I'm going to cock the gun and fire it. Cock the gun and fire it. And the reason that I do that is to settle that reg down to see if I still land back here on 130. All right? And right now, I might have come down just a little bit, so I'm just gonna go ahead and give myself just a little bit more. There you go. I'd say I'm probably at 135 right now. So now I have my high reg set on my dial. Okay, so high reg set. I don't need to touch this anymore. Not for what we're doing, okay? This one, off limits. So I'm going to go ahead and take my barrel off again. I'm going to cock my gun and continue to dry fire the gun until it starts to leak air out again. There we go. And you'll notice that your needle is starting to drop and all your air is rushing out. Don't panic. We know what we're doing, and we're going to get it right back to where it needs to be. So, while we're waiting for this to drain air, I do want to say that today we are not going to be talking about hammer spring adjustment at all, other than what I just mentioned and during this brief intermission while we're waiting for air to come out. I will address in a separate video hammer spring adjustment, and it's because it's really picky in my opinion. It's not like super hard, you know, or anything like that, but you do have to take apart your gun a little bit further, and it will take a little bit more time to deal with. So we're going to go ahead and this thing's just about empty. Alright, air went away. Alright, now that we've got our first reg set, we're going to take our 2.5mm Allen wrench into our second or low side regulator, and we're going to turn it in all the way until we just get a little resistance. That's it. I mean, just 2 fingers, man. I mean, we are not trying to break this thing down, all right? Not trying to hurt it. So now I have my second regulator turned all the way in, bottle, back to the gun. Now, one thing I didn't mention, and I should have, is if you're using a compact, in between every time that you take the bottle off the gun, you will probably need to refill your tank. At least that's what happened when I spoke with somebody earlier. Now, I'm sitting at about 190 bar, so I lost 60 bar just in what I've done so far. All right, back reg is still reading 0. Why is it reading 0? Because now I've shut this valve. So now there's air from my bottle all the way up to here, and now the air isn't going any further until I start to turn this regulator outward in a counterclockwise motion, which is going to start filling my power plenum, and then adjust the regulator back here so I can see what my second regulator pressure is. Now, we already know that we're at about 135 on the first reg, and I want about 100 on my second reg. So very slowly again, we're going to start backing this out until that reads about 100 bar. And it's just little motions, man. I mean, we're talking like 1/8 of a turn, 1/4 of a turn at most. I mean, you definitely don't want to go past it, because if you do, you're going to be draining your gun again. So just go as slow as you have to. This isn't a race. We're not, listen, trust me, slow is going to win this race much quicker than being fast at it. So just take your time, and, you're going to see in a minute here that we're probably going to have to come back and revisit this. All right. I'm right at 100 bar now on my second or low reg. Same thing again. I want to dry fire my gun just a couple of times just to see if the reg settles back down. One thing to keep in mind, and Matt made a great point on this earlier, if you try to adjust the second regulator too low, and I have had this happen, you will notice that when you cock and fire your gun, you will not hear air come from the first side to the second side of your plenum here. If that happens, in my opinion, you need to raise your second reg just a little bit more. Yep. Every time I pull that trigger, I'm hearing air come back in. So, once again, I probably am at 98 bar. I mean, it's so close. So, now that I've fired it a few times, I'm going to go ahead and open it up just a little bit more. I want to get back to that 100. All right, now I'm back at 100. I can actually do the same thing. Yeah, perfect. All right. And there it goes, bringing me right back up to 100 bar. So really, that's it. That's all that's required to adjust your first reg, your high reg, and your second reg or your low reg. Now I've got 135 and 100. So to me, I think this thing is going to be spot on now. I've done a lot of different tunes to this to see kind of where I'm at. When I was at the 110 and the 90, probably, to be honest, the high one should have probably been more around 120, but it didn't make it's not that big of a difference. But I did notice that it just wasn't quite putting out the velocities that I was looking for. If you don't have a chronograph, I would recommend getting a chronograph before you attempt to do these things, only because you have no way of knowing how fast your gun is sending pellets downrange without one. All right? So, now that that's all done, I mean, I'm ready to chronograph my gun. And I'm not going to waste a bunch of you guys' time by sitting here and trying to talk to you guys about it, but I do want you guys to understand that, you know, this is a great way to get to really know your gun, is to you know, tinker with it. You know, if you're not a tinkerer, don't tinker with it. Take it to somebody that knows how to do it. You know, watch these videos over and over until you feel comfortable enough knowing that, you know, you can handle it. But also keeping in mind that you could definitely void your warranty. It's really kind of on you to take that responsibility. It's not on any of us creators that are just trying to help you guys out. And as always, make sure you record your settings. So that way, worst case scenario, if you find that all of a sudden, man, you can't keep a tight group, you at least know where to go take your gun, put it back to where it was, and be on your merry way. All right? One last thing I wanted to cover is, and I want everybody to understand that these are just my observations based upon what I have seen from people with .22 caliber, 25 caliber, and 30 caliber. The general thing that I am seeing as far as target settings is for 22 is roughly 130 and 100. For 22, I would say 150 and 125 is your low reg pressures, right? So those are the high reg and the low reg. So right now at 22, somewhere around 130, 30-ish, 135 and 100 for the 25. And once again, these are just my observations. This is not where you may find that your gun shoots best. Just giving you guys some kind of basic target to shoot for. Would be roughly 150, 125 for 25 caliber. And then for 30 caliber, I've noticed that most people are saying roughly 175, 150. I did see a couple people that were at 200 and 175. So just to kind of give you guys an idea, in case you don't have a 22 caliber, what I've noticed in the groups and the forums that I've been watching and reading and paying attention to. So once again, these are simply ballpark ideas of targeted bar for your first reg and your second reg. It may not be anywhere near what you need to shoot or what you even want to shoot. And that's going to lend a lot to it as well. Whether you're shooting pellets, they're lighter or they're heavier, or you're shooting slugs, lighter or heavier, that's going to all determine how you're going to adjust your gun. I shoot 18.13 grain JSBs out of this, as well as 20 to 22, maybe 24, 25 at the most grain slugs out of this gun. And I feel that this tune is going to be really kind of spot on. Listen, I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. And like I said, I will come back and we'll do another video on the hammer adjustment, the hammer spring adjustment. And, you know, we'll go from there. So, thanks again. This is AirGuns of Michigan. My name's Moose. We're going to be back with more videos. You guys, thanks again. Take care.